Immutable backups are a critical defense against the rising tide of cyber threats. And at a time when ransomware attacks are targeting not just your primary data, but your backups too, understanding immutability is more critical than ever. We'll explore what makes a backup truly immutable, the spectrum of immutability options available, and why this matters so much in your data protection strategy. From tape backups to cutting-edge cloud solutions, we'll cover it all. Are your immutable backups actually immutable? Let's find out. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, also known as Mr. Backup. I've been passionate about this topic for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that there were no backups of the database that we had just lost. I don't want that to ever happen to me again. I don't want it to happen to you, and that's why we do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me my SMB backup difficulty sympathizer, Prasanna Malayandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I've learned more about disk-based backups and tape-based backups in the last 3 weeks from you than any time before. So yeah, how are you doing?
I just if I could get if I could have a wall here, just bang my head into the wall. That's sort of how I feel like I'm doing. I do
see. The problem is that you left it for 20 years and now you're coming back to it, and so that's
not the problem. That implies that I'm old or incompetent or something like that. That is not the problem.
It's like me going back. It's like me going back and coding. I can do it, but I'm not going to be efficient.
It's been really weird, right? Because you change something and you change this, you're like, well, let's try this. And then you try that and you're like, that just doesn't work. That just, and the really weird thing that has been plaguing me over the last several days as I've been trying to make a major change to this backup configuration is that the backup starts out, I'm running 20 backups at the same time. Backups start out and it's running 500 megabytes per second. This is great. This is what I want. And then about a half hour later, it goes
to a slow drip.
What happened? This is not tape. This is not there's not some weird tape, shoe shining thing. This is disk to disk via a server in the middle.
It's probably some random option somewhere because you haven't done this
size data buffers thing. You want to do this on a Thursday? You need to do the setting. And
this is what I said, that because you haven't done this day in and day out, you don't know. It's like you lose touch of these, or you don't know what to look for.
And I will say that when I was last doing this really in earnest, disk backups were relatively new. That really dates me, but that is the case. But so and I just and I've been thankful for you to talk to you. It's like so here's the thing, I got this setting, I got that setting. I've been playing with jumbo frames. I've been playing with buffer settings. I've been playing with all these different things, and and you're like, what about the thing? What about this setting? Oh man.
And you know what? In the end, once you figure out what's going on, it's probably just going to be some simple thing, right? That you just didn't know existed, and you're going to fix it and be like, oh yeah, now it's like boom.
Yeah, and then it's going to run 1,000 megabytes per second, and then everything will be amazing. So we're going to talk about some things that are really new in terms of when I first started with backup. We really didn't talk about this concept when I, was doing backup back in the day. There's a big thing that happened in the last 2 decades that is one of the biggest reasons why we didn't used to talk about cybersecurity and backups, and now we talk about it all the time. Do you know what that is?
What's that?
Sean?
No.
One
The
change.
internet?
No. One
Disk-based
seismic
backups?
change in backups in the last 20 years.
Disk-based backups?
Yes, exactly. Right? Tapes weren't hackable. Tapes were offline by design, right? Ooh, that rhymes. Anytime. So tapes were not sitting there just files ready to be deleted or encrypted. Tapes were inherently hard, even if they were online, even if they were in a tape library, they were hard to get to. And then and if they were offline, if they were sitting, in a tape vaulting vendor, then they were really hard to get to. But the what happened when we went to disk backups, we basically made backups hackable. And so that, and I don't think, in fact, I know, I know we really didn't think that through back when we were
unintended consequences.
Yeah, we were just thinking about all the problems that we were having with tape, and we wanted to fix those problems. And so we went with disk-based backups to fix those problems. And remember, I will always say this: it wasn't the tape was too slow; it was the tape was too fast. And we can, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to listen to more episodes. And we've come a long way, but for a really long time, backups were just sitting there as files, either in a regular, direct attached file system, or an NFS or SMB attached file system that were directly deletable by a privileged user, as long as you had access to that drive. We've hopefully, in most cases, we've gotten away from that. I think still many people go and buy pick your favorite backup, disk vendor, and they just mount it as a backup drive and then start backing up to it. And it's E:\backups. And which just like screams, come delete me. And, I know people still do that, and they shouldn't do that. They should ask their backup vendor, hey, is there a way that I can transfer data to my disk-based backup storage without it showing up as a dry letter on my system or a mounted drive on my Unix system?
Yeah.
But that is a huge change in the security of backups.
Yeah. No, I agree. It made life easier, right? You can now do all the instant access, quickly restore your data, do all the test and dev. But there was a fatal flaw.
Yeah, it made life easier for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then replicated backups, right? We had replicated backups. And then if you have a screw up in your backup system, the replication just makes the screw up more effective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is why we have to talk about immutability. But before we talk about that, we'll talk about some things that haven't changed at all. So the thing I want to talk about is this concept of immutable backups. And that really wasn't something we talked about back in the day.
Well, I think a lot of it back in the day was your backups were kind of already immutable, right? If you were going off to tape, right, then you didn't have to worry about the scenarios that led you to need immutable backups.
Yeah, that's really true, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about, right? I would say the biggest reason was that no one was attacking the backups. No one was trying to attack the backups. And the worst things that we were worried about were things like we were worried about a natural disaster or a terrorist attack taking out the entire place where backups were stored. So we needed to make sure to have an air gap, a physical separation between the backups and and the copy of the backups, right?
A natural disaster on a tropical island.
Exactly, right. Exactly. And so we weren't really we weren't at all. I could just absolutely tell you that we were not at all ever thinking about a cyber attack trying to I don't even think we had that term. I mean, we had the internet, but we didn't really have the term cyber attack, at least that I remember. We certainly never used it in backup circles.
It was different, right? Because you weren't necessarily worried about people stealing your data or things like that. I remember you were the one who recommended me to read The Cuckoo's Nest, right? And
Yeah.
so those were the types of attacks that you sort of saw back in those days,
Yeah.
right? Stealing resources, not necessarily stealing your data
Yeah.
as much.
Cuckoo's Egg, by the way.
Or sorry, Cuckoo's Egg.
Which, by the way, if you're out there and you don't know what we're talking about, great book. And it's a relatively short read. It's a great book to read, and it's a true story that involves a cyber attack against a university. It's great. So before we talk about immutable backups, I want to talk about some of the things that really haven't changed that are also impediments to having a safe backup system. And the first is the fact that backups never were, never have been, and never will be the sexy part of the data center.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I 100% agree. No one wants to do backups. No one wants to spend the money on backups, right? Everyone wants to be like, ooh, I need to do, given the recent trend these days, I want to focus on AI and do this and that and all the rest.
Right.
But
Right.
no one wants to focus on how do I protect it, other than people like Curtis.
Other than a few weird people. I would say that there were a lot of reasons. The biggest reason is easily that it is a very difficult job. We started out this episode talking about how difficult it can be. You're invisible or you're in trouble. No one remembers the millions of backups that you got right. They only remember the one restore that you got wrong. And so nobody wants to have that pressure on themselves. And so nobody wants to raise their hand in the room to say, hey, I'll be in charge of backups. So this is true in terms of it's not the sexy part of the data center, which means nobody wants to do it. Number one. Number two, nobody wants to give that part of the data center any money. And then number three, I'd say, is that as a result, it goes ignored.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. I think there was a study, I can't remember when it was, that what percentage of an IT budget do you think goes towards backup?
It's a very small portion.
I think it was less than 1%.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, so it goes ignored. It goes ignored from a budget perspective. It goes ignored from the cybersecurity perspective, which is really what we're talking about. It's what we've been talking about the last several episodes is cybersecurity and backups. And it means that it doesn't get put front of the line when we start talking about putting out patches. It doesn't get put front of the line in terms of looking for trends that could be scary. It literally just goes ignored. And that's a really scary thing.
Yeah. And it's not even thought of initially when I know we've talked on the episodes that when you are deploying a new application, you should be thinking about backup, or at least have the backup person in the room. But sometimes things develop so quickly that backup is an afterthought, right? And sometimes it's very painful.
Yeah, very much so. I can remember one example of that when we bought the bank that I worked at bought an HP. What was it, 1000? I think was the HP T1000. That's what it was. It was a T1000, and it came in and it had it was huge. It was, are you ready? 100 gigabytes of data. It was huge.
Humongous.
It was humongous, right?
Now your phone has more than that.
Prior to this server showing up at our data center, the biggest server we had was like 4. And then suddenly we had a single server that was 25 times bigger than the next biggest server. And it came with a DDS drive, which was a 4 gigabyte drive. And I just remember asking, like, who's going to stand here all night long and swap tapes 25 times to get a backup? And that was, and nobody had even thought of that. That's the point. That nobody had even thought, well, maybe we should have enough backup infrastructure to back up this new gigantic server. And that was, by the way, how I got my first justification to buy my first tape robot, which was the first time I sent money to SpectraLogic back in the day.
You weren't just sitting there all night swapping tapes, Curtis?
I was definitely not going to do that. Definitely not. So that problem's not a new problem. The other thing, and as a result of all of those things that we just talked about, a very common thing for computing infrastructure or for computing environments to do is to give backups to the new person. Right?
Yeah.
It was the first job I ever got. I was just editing the podcast with Dwayne LaFlotte. He said it was the first job he ever got. And the problem with that really is you have this really, really important, really secure, or what should be a really secure job, and you're handing it to the least experienced member of the the team, right? I mean, I had been at the bank, essentially a week. I had been in computers, like commercial computers, and I had been introduced to Unix for a few months. I'd been at this company. I think I'd worked at this company for like 2 months prior to going to the bank, and I had been, I had been given some lessons in Unix, and I had been demonstrated the importance of a really good backup. This was the first time in my career when
Theoretical versus practical.
Yeah. So we were a blended call management system, which you might refer to as an autodialer. And that was a naughty word back in the day, right? We were not an autodialer. We were an intelligent call management system. But it was essentially an autodialer.
Yeah.
And it had this very fancy Unix-based computer behind it. And we would go out and do this it was like this long involved install, because this was before VoIP and all that kind of stuff. We had literally cards that went in the server, and each card connected to a POTS line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had this big physical install that we had to do, and it took about 2 weeks. And then you sent a couple of SEs on site, and I was one of the SEs. I was obviously the junior SE, and this other guy had been doing all this configuration. And the job that we were supposed to do before we left was to pop in a tape. By the way, a tape, a 9-track tape,
ginormous,
right?
Yeah,
and pop in a 9-track tape and back up the OS configuration that we had just finished. That was the last thing that we were supposed to do. And just before doing that, my compadre said he was looking at the root file system, and he noticed that there were a couple of garbage files in the root file system. And one of them started with question mark and had a bunch of garbledygook stuff after it. So he didn't want to type all of the garbledygook. So he typed RM minus RF question mark star from the root file system, wanting to clean up the OS before we took the backup.
Oh, geez. That must have been interesting.
Yeah, so that was the day that I learned the value of a good backup. The best time to do a backup is yesterday. The second best time is today.
It's today.
This was definitely the second best time. So we lost a whole bunch of work. And luckily, it was not my fault. So I just learned a very valuable lesson. Anyway, sorry, that was bringing me back in the day. So it's a horrible practice that we put the most junior person in charge of the backups, and that should absolutely stop. But I don't know how to merge those two. How do you properly reward this job that is really, really important, such that someone who isn't junior is going to want to take the job? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Do you, Prasanna?
Well, no. But but if you think about this really isn't any different than, say, a DBA, right? A database admin who starts off, initially does some basic things, right? And over time, they sort of become like that database architect who's sort of figuring out overall layouts and things like that rather than sort of just administering the system. Now, the difference is in the case of the DBA, you're probably starting off in like test and dev instances or
Yeah.
like non critical applications, versus as a backup admin, you're probably starting off on like the critical infrastructure that you are protecting.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I'm not sure I agree with your comparison there because, well, first off, people actually want to be DBAs,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and yeah. Maybe what you need to do is like a cross training program where you do a rotation in like a different part of the organization and then you come into the backup work, because that way at least you're also get more familiar with tools and other things.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
That way
It's
you're not the junior person.
exactly. Yeah, you need. I guess the best thing we want to do here is to make sure that you're making sure that your junior person that you're giving but the backups to has some really good cybersecurity, at least some basic cybersecurity
Yeah.
training, right? Because you're handing them, in order to do the backups, they are a very powerful person and they have the ability to read and write every file, right? Which means they have the ability to overwrite every file in the organization. Even if you're using proper modern backup design that uses role-based administration and all of that, you're still most likely handing them the keys to the kingdom.
Is
You know,
that true though? Because normally don't you have sort of help desk, restore operators, and then the more senior people are kind of those who are doing like the backup architecture and the design. You probably have people who are
in
figuring out.
in a large environment, that would be the case, but that's not the case in most companies. I
That's
don't
true.
think. I think it's just
Yeah.
one person. Actually, in most companies, it's a collateral duty, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's get to the meat of the episode here, where we want to talk about immutable backups. So, first off, just generally speaking, what does immutable mean?
It basically means you can't change it.
Yeah, that's literally it's a word that's used outside of IT, but within IT, yeah, it means that it cannot be changed.
Which
And
also includes deletions.
yeah, yeah, deletion is a change, right?
Yes.
Um, and the difficulty here is that that sounds like a binary condition,
Mhm.
right? Like pregnant or dead, right?
Not the words I would have chosen, but sure.
Both pregnancy and death are binary conditions. You're either pregnant or you're not, or you're dead or alive, right? These are binary conditions. Immutable should be a binary condition. That is what is implied when we say immutable. It can't be changed. It can't be deleted. It can't be encrypted. It can't be modified. It can't be. I don't know. I think I covered them all.
Yeah.
Um,
But there's really
but
a spectrum though.
it is definitely a spectrum, and that is the problem. Is that immutable? And that's the thing I wanted to just mention. So let me ask you this: why has immutable backups? Why has that really come to the fore in the last, say, 10 years or so?
Well, like you were talking about earlier in the episode, cyber attacks, right? Ransomware attacks, they not only go after your production, but they realize that, hey, you have all this data sitting in your backup systems that you could use to recover your environment and not pay the ransom. So instead, we're going to go attack your backup systems, delete all your backups so you can't recover. And then also because they're doing the double extortion where they also exfiltrate your data,
Right.
that's a treasure trove, right? They don't have to go hit 20 different systems. If they get to your backup system, all your data is there, and backup systems are really good at restoring data, so they can quickly pull the data out and then blackmail you in case you decide that you don't want to pay the ransom.
Yeah, exactly. Now, immutability won't address that second part. It is important to right. Those are the two main concerns that we have when we talk about the backup system. And you should definitely listen to the episode that went live let's see, that would have been May 26th now. The one with Dwayne LaFleur, where he talks a bit from the Red Team cybersecurity episode, that where he talks about what a treasure trove the backup system is and how he's a Red Team, he's a hacker, that, an offensive cybersecurity person. He's very offensive. and he loves going after the backup system, right? When we talk about immutability, we're primarily concerned with making sure that the backups themselves aren't modified, right?
Yeah.
And which, as we said, and like you said, this wasn't a problem, I don't know, even 5 years ago, maybe. This wasn't a problem, but hackers weren't going directly after the backups, but now they definitely are, because they're the best defense we have against ransomware, right?
Yeah. And I would say before, immutable backups / immutable archiving was really intended as a compliance use case.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, is let's talk about the different things that people mean when they say immutable, right? And prior to cyber security attacks, when we talked about the backup system or the archive system, which are different things, when we talk about the backup system or the archive system being immutable, what we're primarily wanting to be able to say in a court of law, that this file, this document that I'm presenting in court is exactly the same as it was when it was created, right? This email that is the smoking gun, we can state it is a faithful reproduction of the original email that the plaintiff made, or the defendant made. It's a faithful reproduction of the email that the defendant made, that shows that they were doing the thing that they weren't supposed to be doing, right? Yeah. And so that the defense can't say, oh, well, that's a fake email, right? Like, no, this is a faithful reproduction of the email that this, and here's the chain of custody and the chain of technology to get from A to B. And so, it's fine.
It's as good as a source. It's as good as the original.
Yeah, it's as good. We are essentially looking directly into the email system from 3 months ago or 3 years ago or whatever it is, right? That's what we were primarily concerned with. And we are still concerned with that, right? We are still concerned with immutability for that reason from a legal perspective. But what we're now more concerned with is that someone could go in and modify the backups in such a way that they encrypt them, they delete them. They could actually modify them. I don't know of any scenario
that'd be worth the
case, but they could potentially go in and selectively modify them to mess with people for whatever reason. But that shouldn't be able to be the case either, right?
Yeah, and that just seems like a lot of work to go selectively modify, unless you're trying to do something sneakily without being detected.
Right. So that's one way that backup systems and archive systems use the term immutability, is they say, we can say that, these two things are the same. So the next thing that I see is that I see vendors that say, well, we have we have an append only file system, that once backups are written into our append only file system, they cannot be modified. Have you seen backup folks saying that?
Yeah, no, I've seen some storage vendors, right? You have companies who do backup appliances like Rubrik who say, yeah, once you write your backup to our system, right, you can't go and overwrite that data again. Right. It's sort of a write only. And having worked at a storage company, which was famous for a write anywhere file layout,
right,
I could see the benefits of doing it that way.
Right. Yeah. And what this says is that it stops direct attacks against the backup storage itself. That if I'm able to get into the file system, if I'm able to get into the operating system of that backup system, I wouldn't be able to modify or delete the backup files in order to, essentially delete them. I wouldn't be able to encrypt or delete them because this is this append-only file system.
Which is interesting because I do wonder about certain scenarios like, hey, I'm running low on space. I need to go delete a whole bunch of backups or backup sets in order to free things up. What do I do? Am I just stuck?
Yeah, that's gonna be depending on the product, right? So the question, my question is with the product in question, and that this isn't necessarily Rubrik. This is just this is the question that we're asking. I understand you're saying that it's an append-only file system. What about the system that's controlling the backups itself? What protection is there in that system? Meaning, if I am a privileged user, am I able to delete backups? Right? Am I able to prematurely expire backups? Because even with immutable storage, it can have an expiration date, right? So you can say these backups are immutable for 90 days and then they can expire. But if I am, the super high cloud administrator of this backup system, am I able to then expire backups early? And if you are, then that is, again, this is why I say immutable backups are a spectrum, because the question is, if I am, super high up in the echelon, if I make a phone call to this person, is there a way to expire older backups? Yeah. I would also ask, is there a privileged account in the operating system that allows me to essentially expire all backups? That reset the system. Some backup systems that, even though they're immutable, if I have access to this one privileged account, I can wipe out all backups with a single command.
Yeah. Or reset the system back to factory state, right? That's sometimes common.
Right. So that is another one that would be called immutable, right? And I'm not saying that any of these aren't immutable. I'm just saying that there are a whole bunch of things that are called immutable. Right.
Yeah.
Another one, and this is where and again, this is like good, better, best, right? Anything would be better than backups sitting on just an open Windows file system with zero security checks, right? Anything would be better than that. And
I think I have a worse scenario.
Okay.
A Windows system open to the internet.
Yeah. With
RDP enabled.
RDP enabled. Yeah. The next, one of the most surprising things when I listened to the episode with Dwayne again was when he said that so many times that they go in with the default password and that it works. That just hurts.
The next one is really about something, so not the best, right, but better than the Windows system,
right,
which is good, which is having a server that has been hardened and locked down and secured such that you are protecting from most common issues and security vulnerabilities, but it may not still be perfect. And in this example, right, we had Dave Russell and Rick Vanover from Veeam over talking about the hardened backup repository,
right,
I think is the official name, which is basically a server which they lock down, which allows you to write Veeam backups to it, and they have an immutable flag in the Linux repository such that the backups cannot just be normally deleted, casually deleted, I would say.
Right. Yeah. They can't be deleted by anyone except for root. Right. And they can't even be accidentally deleted by root. The root would have a person with root would have to unset the immutability flag on the file and then delete the file. Right.
Yeah.
So this is what, I agree with you that it is better than, having a Windows file system. I mean, first off, it's just better in that it's Linux and not Windows. And I don't just mean that Linux is better than Windows. What I mean is it's something different. right?
Yeah.
And then because I definitely do not think that Linux is perfect, right? I do still like the Linux way of everything is off by default versus the Windows way where everything is on by default. Although I think they've gotten better at that over the years. The it is important to understand that if someone gains root, then they're able to modify these files. Now, they do a really good job, I think, specifically with the Veeam repository. They do a really good job of giving you a list of things that you need to do, where it's like essentially, but once you've configured the system, you can configure it, for example, to automatically update itself with security patches, and that you don't need to be logging into it regularly as root. So you can like super secure that thing, so that if anyone ever does log into it as root, it can set off all sorts of bells and whistles, so that you can know that something bad is going on.
Yeah. And I know we've talked in the past about like patch management. Go do your patch management all the time. And having an automated process and keeping it up to date, I think, is a great feature that has.
Right. And then I would say what's the next, and I'm going to put this up in terms of the best, as far as I can see, is that here's an immutable system where backups cannot be modified even by a privileged account, even by somebody with root. And there would be two types of systems like that. One would be a backup, a storage system that could be on-prem. Another would be something like a cloud system like S3 with the immutable flag turned on to that. And I would actually put them in terms of like the on-prem system isn't as secure as the cloud system, in my opinion. Why would that be?
Because you can physically access the system and yank the drives and all the rest.
Yeah, physical access trumps all. Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny. A lot of people are like, oh, the cloud is insecure. And I'm like, well, physical systems on-prem are insecure. Right. Because I can easily go up to that and I can do bad things to it as long as I know where it's at.
Yeah. And even with the physical storage systems, I know at NetApp and even with AWS's Object Lock, right, they do have those two different modes, compliance and governance.
Right.
For their immutability options. One which sort of allows an admin to reset the flag, right? Like we had talked about earlier. So it's good enough, but there are cases where, yeah, I need to unset it. So they do give you that option. And then the other one is you can't touch it unless you basically, in the case of AWS, blow away your account, right? So it's really nothing you could do as an admin will help you.
Yeah, and just realize that what I would call a truly immutable system, if you change your mind, you can't change your mind.
Yeah.
Right? If it's truly immutable, you should not be able to blow it away. Now, I still haven't done this experiment, and I really am going to do this at one point where I create an AWS account, turn on immutability, put a bunch of stuff in there, and then delete the account and see what happens. I don't know what happens there, and then stop paying my bill. No immutability system outlives not paying for your storage.
Yeah, they will probably reclaim that data as quickly as they can, Curtis.
Do garbage collection. Goodbye, Curtis's data. I mean, I will say that in that case, it's kind of your own fault. But so this is what we mean when we say that immutable backups. You want to make sure that a black hat, a bad actor that gets into your environment cannot do damage to the backup system. And so you want to separate backups as much as you can from the bad actor. And the best way to do that is to store them in an immutable system. Just realize that there is a spectrum of immutability, and all of them, they all say their backups are immutable, right?
I think it's also important to note that you may not need the best solution for your use case and your needs. So also make sure you understand what you're protecting against, because there is going to be cost, there is going to be complexity potentially with those solutions. And maybe it isn't needed to go to that extent. And maybe like better is good enough.
Yeah, never let perfect be the enemy of better, right? So, you could be better, and that's okay. Always
Yep.
strive to be better, but don't let say, well, this immutable system doesn't work in this one scenario. Don't let that prevent you from doing something. Something is always better than nothing, right? One thing I do want to mention is that MFA is a big part of this. Some of these systems that have it's immutable except for the super powerful person, or it's immutable unless you make these 17 phone calls to, you've got to really, really authenticate yourself. I have seen scenarios where companies have had their email system hacked in addition to their backup system being hacked. And the result was that they were able to defeat MFA because they were
Yep.
using email as their MFA.
And the other thing is also phone, because now they can impersonate someone, call in, they have all the access to the emails and can spoof like 2-factor codes and talk to the person on the other end, and they don't know the difference.
Yeah, the ability of AI systems these days to mimic the sound of another person's voice, and in fact, just as a demonstration, the next 30 seconds of audio is completely fake. How are you doing, Prasanna?
I'm doing fine, Curtis. What are we talking about today?
I think we're talking about immutable backups, and I hear that they are on a spectrum.
You mean like IBM Spectrum Protect?
No, that's a backup product.
You mean the Irvine Spectrum?
No, that's a mall. I mean that there are many things that are called immutable, and they all have different levels of protection against attacks. Nice talking with you, fake Prasanna.
You too, fake Curtis.
So that was neither me nor Prasanna talking, for the record. That was a little tool that we use. That is very useful in the right scenario, but very dangerous in the wrong scenario. You really have to think about that, right? When you put all these layers, if you have all these layers of security between you and the ability to delete your quote immutable data, think about all of the modern things that people are able to do before you settle with one of those systems. And again, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, but just think about all the things that are possible these days. They can fake video, they can fake audio, they can certainly fake email and phones, right? SMS is a horrible way to do things, right? But with that, that's our discussion on immutable backups. I hope you enjoyed it, Prasanna.
No, this was a good topic. I like immutable backups.
Yeah, immutable backups, good. And hope you enjoyed that as a listener. Hope you learned a thing or two. And with that, that's a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.